Welcome to the third lesson we have in Daniel. If you don't know who I am, I'm Eric Mustaine and a member of Coach's Class, so welcome again to Coach's Class. I miss seeing all of you. I just told, and thank Aaron for helping with this, I just told Aaron that one of the things I miss the most is sitting in the back row of the choir in the bass section and seeing all of your faces. So we'll get through this, and Daniel is the perfect book to talk about going through trying times. Now our lesson is in chapter 2 of Daniel, so if you have your scriptures, I don't want to rehash the previous lesson, but there's some verses that we need to go back to so we're all in the context of the lesson. So all of it is in chapter 2 of Daniel. So let's first of all look at verse 3. And Nebuchadnezzar says, he said to them, I have had a dream that troubles me, and I want to know what it means. He had a dream that was devastating in his mind, and he couldn't get rid of it. Skip down to verses 5 and 6. The king replied to the astrologers, this is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me what my dream was and interpret it, think about that. He's not telling what the dream is. You have to tell me the dream and then interpret it. I will have you cut into pieces and your houses turned into piles of rubble. But if you tell me the dream and explain it, you will receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. So tell me the dream and interpret it for me. Skip down to verse 10. The astrologers answered the king, there is no one on earth who can do what the king asked. No king, however great and mighty, has ever asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or astrologer. That's interesting. He's saying, Nebuchadnezzar, you've gone off the reservation. What the king asks is too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, and they do not live among humans. So he is saying that his religion is empty. His gods do not live among humans, but there is one God who does. And then we skip down to 14 through 19. When Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, had gone out when Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, had gone out to put to death the wise men of Babylon, Daniel spoke to him with wisdom and tact. Daniel comes through again. He asked the king's officer, why did the king issue such a harsh decree? Arioch then explained the matter to Daniel. At this, Daniel went in to the king and asked for time so that he might interpret the dream for him. And then Daniel returned to his house and explained the matter to his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. He urged them to plead for mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. So these 4 young men are under a death execution order. During the night, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Then Daniel praised the God of heaven. And then 27 to 30, to get us to here, Daniel comes into the presence of Nebuchadnezzar and says, no wise man, enchanter, magician, or diviner can explain to the king the mystery he is asked about. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. He has shown King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in days to come, your dream and the visions that pass through your mind as you were lying in bed are these. So, the 2 important things about this is Daniel asked for help. Okay, all 4 were praying to God that they would be able to not only tell Nebuchadnezzar the dream, but to interpret the dream. So Daniel asks for help, and notice that he says that God in heaven is the one who allowed him to know the dream and interpret it. So let's look at the dream. And this is a section that starts in verse 31. And we can really see why this is so terrifying to Nebuchadnezzar. As your majesty was lying there, your mind turned to things to come. And the revealer of mysteries, God, showed you what is going to happen. As for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because I have greater wisdom than anyone else alive, but so that your majesty may know the interpretation and that you may understand what went through your mind. So Daniel is giving the credit to God. God is the revealer of mysteries. So let's look. Your majesty looked, and there before you stood a large statue, an enormous, dazzling statue, awesome in appearance. We use awesome way too much in our society, but it was just an awe-inspiring vision. The size of the statue, and it was enormous, and it was dazzling. The head of the statue was made of pure gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of baked clay. Okay? So that is this amazing statue. So people have commented, looking at this passage, that the value declines as far as the materials from head to toe. So we start at the head with gold. A little lesser value is silver, the chest and arms. Bronze is a little lesser value. The belly and thighs, the legs, iron, and the feet, iron and baked clay. So there's a descending order of value here as far as the materials that make up this gigantic, awe-inspiring statue. Okay? And while you were watching, now we're down at verse 34, and now while you were watching, a rock was cut out, but not by human hands. So that's a very important verse. This rock is not from the earth. It's an otherworldly rock. It struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and smashed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were all broken to pieces and became like chaff on a threshing floor in the summer. The wind swept them away without leaving a trace. But the rock that struck the statue became a huge mountain and filled the whole earth. Now, one thing about the backstory of this is Nebuchadnezzar probably understood what the statue was. Because in this time in history, if you were a king or a pharaoh, you erected a statue that you placed in a prominent place. And the purpose of that statue was to say, this is my kingdom. This is my kingdom. So with that as background, seeing that statue just shattered was terrifying to Nebuchadnezzar. So we kind of can get the psychology of Nebuchadnezzar here of why he was so terrified and extreme about finding out what this meant. So Daniel then in 36 to 45, verses 36 to 45, tells us what all this means. Okay? So this was the dream, and now we will interpret it to the king. Isn't it interesting that he says we will interpret it to the king? So he's including two things here. He's including God, okay? God and I are going to interpret the dream. It's not me. He's already said it's God. But he's also including his buddies, okay? They were praying to God just as much as Daniel was. They were under the death sentence. And because of them and their prayers, the dream and the interpretation was given to Daniel. Your Majesty, you are the King of Kings. The God of heaven has given you dominion and power and might and glory. In your hands he has placed all mankind and the beasts of the field and the birds in the sky. Wherever they live, he has made you ruler over them all. You are that head of gold. So the head of gold is Babylon. After you, another kingdom will arise, inferior to yours. Okay, so what's the silver? The silver is the Medo-Persian Empire who conquered Babylon. So that's a succession. Okay, next, the third kingdom, one of bronze, will rule over the whole earth. And the bronze kingdom is, most people interpret as Greece, because in the era of Alexander the Great, the Greeks ruled the known world of this time. Okay? So we have the gold, the silver, the bronze. And finally, there will be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, for iron breaks and smashes everything. And as iron breaks things to pieces, so it will crush and break all others. Just as you saw that the feet and toes were partly of baked clay and partly of iron, so this will be a divided kingdom. Yet it will have some of the strength of iron in it, even as you saw iron mixed with clay. As the toes were partly iron and partly clay, so this kingdom will be partly strong and partly brittle. And just as you saw the iron mixed with baked clay, so the people will be a mixture and will not remain united any more than iron mixes with clay. So he spends a lot of time, the vision spends a lot of time about the iron and the clay, and that's the Roman Empire. That's the Roman Empire. So if you look, how did Rome maintain their authority? They crushed and broke others. They took over societies. And the kingdom eventually split as the Roman Empire disintegrated. The western part went first, and that is why it was divided. So the western and the eastern, the empire crumbled in the west first, and then later, even though it lasted 1,000 years, the eastern part survived. Okay, so we've explained the statue. Babylon, Persia, Greece, and the Roman Empire. So what about this great stone? What about this otherworldly stone? In the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. Okay? So the stone is going to smash the statues in God's time. Talk about prophecy. This goes clear into the New Testament. And the stone will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it will also endure forever. So this is the kingdom that's established when it's a messianic kingdom. And if you look, this is the meaning of the vision of the rock cut out of a mountain, but not by human hands, a rock that broke the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold to pieces. The great God has shown the king what will take place in the future. The dream is true and its interpretation is trustworthy. So what's interesting about the rock The rock smashes the statue. The statue crumbles, breaks into pieces, smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller pieces, until the pieces are like chaff. They're like dust and are blown away by the wind. Okay? But the thing about the rock is the rock that struck the statue became, it's growing, it became a huge mountain and filled the whole earth. And that's the kingdom of God. So that is the dream, and that's the interpretation. Now, to finish up, what did Nebuchadnezzar do now? What did he do after having this dream that terrified him explained and interpreted? And this is in 46 to 49. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell prostrate before Daniel. Isn't that an amazing scene? The king, who has the power to kill Daniel with the death sentence, the king of Babylon, the most powerful man in this known world at this time, fell prostrate before Daniel, the refugee, the slave, and paid him honor and ordered that an offering and incense be presented to him. Nebuchadnezzar must have had just a boulder taken off of his shoulders that he had this terrifying dream told to him, back to him, and interpreted for him. The king said to Daniel, "Surely your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings and the revealer of mysteries, for you were able to reveal this mystery." So the actions of Daniel and his three friends led the king to know who God was. And isn't that our mission always? Our actions should lead others to know who God is. And that's exactly what Daniel did. That's exactly what Daniel did, and his friends. Then the king placed Daniel in a high position and lavished many gifts on him. He made him ruler over the entire province of Babylon and placed him in charge of all its wise men. Moreover, at Daniel's request, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego administrators over the province of Babylon, while Daniel himself remained at the royal court. So Daniel always looked for help. He looked for help when he needed to pray to the Lord to give us a vision for what this dream is and how to interpret it. And he knows he needs help as he administrates the nation of Babylon. So just an incredible story. Incredible story. And as you look at these nations that progress, you can look up. I'll give you a little homework. Isaiah 40:15 talks about the nations are like a drop in the bucket. They are like dust on the scales. So nations will rise and fall, but God and his kingdom is eternal. So what can we learn from this? There's three things. The Lord God is one and the only God. No matter what anybody says, that is it. History is under God's control. And if anything should make us feel better at this time, it is that God hasn't gone anywhere. He is still in control. And God's kingdom has the ultimate and eternal authority. So I hope this lesson has meant something to you. It certainly meant something to me. And I hope you stay safe and healthy.